Hello everybody, my name is Andrei Chis. I'm from Think, and today I'm going to talk to you about Lepíter. So if you didn't hear about Think before, we are the ones that are doing the glamorous toolkit and talking about moldable development. And today, I'm going to talk to you about Lepíter. This is what we are referring to as a moldable knowledge platform. And hopefully, at the end of this talk, you're going to see what that means or what we understand by that. The rest of my talk is just going to be a demo, so I just have one slide. If I close this, I'm going to be in GT. And the first thing that we're going to focus on are some use cases that we can do in Lepíter. And the first use case is about taking notes. So if I'm a person that wants to take notes, I am able to do that in GT through Lepíter. There is here a button called Note that if I click will open a new note. I already have one here. And in Lepíter, a note is a page where I can write text. So for example, this is a note. And then I can have more notes. This is another note. Another note. And now notes don't just have to be linear. We can have them nested. So I could say this is a nested note, or I can even nest an even more nested note. And I could continue like this. However, until now I just wrote text, which is nice but can be just boring. So another thing we can do is create links. So here I have a page, it's labeled that what is a note, and I could have other pages in my knowledge base. And what I want to do is link to them. So for example, this is a link to a page. And now if I type, in our case, links are being used with 2 square brackets, I will get an autocomplete for other named pages in my current knowledge base. In this case, I want moldable development. And if I click Enter, I will get a link to that page, which if I'm going to click, in the same workflow, I'm going to get a new pane, which shows me that page. In this case, these are some notes that I did about moldable development. I could close this, go back, and of course, we want also to link to other types of content, not just pages. And since we are in an IDE, we want to be able to link to various code entities. For example, classes. I could say this is a link to a class. And now, the way we are introducing links like this is through annotations. So in this case, if I type curly braces, so 2 curly braces, I get a different type of autocomplete. So this shows me what are all the possible annotations that I can embed in a text at the moment. So in this case, I want a GT class. And after I type the name of the annotation, now I can give some parameters. So now I will get an autocomplete at the level of some parameters that this annotation supports. In this case, it's name. I will select name. And after I selected the name, I get a very different kind of autocomplete. So at this time, I get an autocomplete that is for classes in this system, because I said I wanted to have a link to a class. So maybe I want to link, I don't know, to BL element. Now I search for it, and now here, if I type more, I have a link to a class. If I click on it, in the same workflow, what I'm going to get is a coder. So the system is going to open this class with a tool that's meant for opening classes. In each case, it's a coder. If I'm just interested more in this class, I can expand. And now I have a full coder where I'm in the context of this class. Now, if I can always go back. I will close this. And an interesting aspect here is that notice now it just says this is a link to a class. And I no longer see the code of the annotation. We have this mixed mode between editing and viewing. So now if I go back with the cursor near the annotation, what is going to show me is the source code of the annotation. If I go back, it's going to disappear. So we're trying to have a mixed mode for viewing and editing. That whenever I come close to an annotation, it's going to show me the source for that annotation so I can edit. Whenever I move away from it, it just shows me how that looks like in the system. And of course, we can link to several other things. More interesting would be an example. I will just make this a bit more because I will need more space. This is a link to an example. And now what do we mean by example? By example, we mean methods that for us, examples are like tests. You can see them as tests that return objects. Let's see an example of an example. So we have the annotation GT example, which in this case wants me to give it something. So the name here is going to be a class that defines examples. So I'm going to use GT RL releaser usage examples. And now the next autocomplete that I'm getting is one for methods in this class that are examples. So not all the methods in this class, only those methods that are examples. In this case, I want this one. And if I did this, I will get embedded an editor on that method. So this is an example. It has GT example. It can have assertions. And in this case, it returns an object. OK, this is interesting. But even more interesting is, OK, I have the source code. But not all the time what we are interested in is the actual source code. Since this is an example, I can execute it, get back an object, and maybe I'm more interested in that object being embedded in the documentation rather than just the source code. In this case, I could say no code equals true. So now the only thing that I have here is the object that's returned by executing that example method. So I can browse to its presentations and maybe views, and maybe I'm just interested really in this one, in this release map, not all the others. I could do a alt click on the name. So then the next pane will open the method that's implementing this view. In this case, it's GT repo map. What I can do is copy the name. It's faster this way. And now, if I go back here, I could say, for example, preview show, and give it the name of one of those views that creates, one of those methods that creates a view. And in this case, all that is going to be embedded is that actual view. If I go away and have the annotation disappeared, now I build my documentation by embedding a view of an object created by an example. So this is the kind of extensions that we are trying to create. And just to emphasize more the completion part. So as you saw, through different parts of this snippet, we had different kinds of completions that were searching for different things. So in GT, completion is more as a service that tools can just request in the system. And to give you an even better example of that, we have another example of an annotation, which is also for demo purposes, but not just, which is a to-do annotation. So I am a to-do. And now I will do GT to-do. And in this case, I have to give the label first, the to-do first label. So I would say, I don't know, prepare my GT talk. And now I have to specify to when. Maybe I will say due. And at this point, I'm going to get an autocomplete. But in this time, the autocomplete is not textual. It can also be visual. So it's a calendar. So, OK, it's a bit small, so maybe I will do it a bit less. And now if I start completion, it's going to be a calendar, and I might say, OK, I want to do to 25th of this month. That is my talk. So now we had the completion that was not inserting, was not something a list visual, was not a list of elements, what's a visual widget. So completion, it's a generic mechanism, and widgets can instantiate it visually or graphically as they want. So if we go back here, again, this is going to disappear. And actually, if I click on this, it means I'm completing the to-do. And if I show you again, this one is actually going to append something to the markup. So this markup can also be live edited by various actions that I'm doing within the text. Up to here, all that we looked at was something textual. So we had various pieces of text that were having various types of annotations. This is one way that we support extensibility in Lepíter. However, we don't want everything to simply be textual. Because of that, we have this notion of snippets. What you saw here were text snippets. However, we can have many other types of snippets. I will just create first a new text. So we'll say snippets. And now I want the rest to be added as children to this snippet. So first, of course, it's code. So I could create a Pharo snippet where I could write Pharo code if I want. I could say, I don't know, GT view, GT pragmas. This will be a code snippet that will give me all the methods that are annotated with the GTView pragma. I could execute it, and then I get back the actual list. If I expand one of those, yeah, I will see that here filters or searches are highlighting what they search for in a method. Okay, so I have here textual, not a code snippet. However, we can also have others. Let's see a few more. I could have an example. An example is something that we saw before as an annotation, but we could also have it not necessarily embedded in a text. We could also have it as a standalone snippet within the page. So in this case, if I go back before, I was here, and I will just copy here the text because it's faster for the demo. Can I copy? Yes. And now I will paste the same code here in the example snippet. I'm going to get the view. And now this is no longer something that's embedded in a text snippet. It's its own independent snippet. Recently, we added another type of snippet. This is called, for example, a Faro rewrite. So we want to show that any kind of tool can be decomposed. We don't have to have these monolithic tools. We can have smaller tools that then we can embed in a narrative through snippets. And now I created this snippet, I get a Faro rewrite snippet. So this implements a very common operation where I want to search through code using a pattern and maybe apply a rewrite. Let's say I'm going to do children, and I'm going to use this, is nil, if true. Maybe return self. So this is a piece of code, and now if I apply here execute it, it's going to search through the system for all the places that match this pattern here. In this case, it found one. Now it found one, and I wrote this snippet in a very concrete way, but maybe I want to transform it to be more generic. So let's say I want to find all places that search for is nil if true within my system. I could do that by right-clicking here and then saying I want this to match, instead of children, I want it to match anything. And now it's going to replace it with the syntax of this pattern language that matches anything. So you don't necessarily have to know this syntax in order to build these patterns. You can build them step by step. For example, I could do the same here. And this time, I don't want self. I want actually return self to match anything. And if I execute, now this is going to match me all the places where I have something is nil if true something. So I just wrote interactively a rewrite rule without necessarily having to know the syntax of this rewrite engine. And I could just do something here to replace. We can also get autocomplete at this level. So I want to do any, and ideally I want to replace this if true. And now I want to have any one. And if I execute this, what I will get back is a list of refactorings that will show me what they changed, that I could apply and perform this refactoring within the system. And another thing that I could do, for example, maybe I don't like this anyone. I could come and I could say, okay, I wanted to rename this one. Maybe I wanted to rename to, I don't know, main logic or something like this. And then the refactoring is going to be applied in both editors whenever this variable is used. So like that, we can have a snippet that gives one kind of rewrite tool that people could just embed. I could just embed in any node that I have a rewrite. I could have a list of rewrites that I consider interesting and then execute them directly within the page. These snippets don't necessarily also have to be, don't have to be just like textual. We have another snippet. This is a wordly map snippet that actually opens an editor for wordly maps. A wordly map is just a kind of a visualization that businesses can use in order to understand better their domain, and it works that you have a set of activities that you are placing on a value chain. So there's genesis, custom build, product, or commodity. It's a kind of a value chain where we can place items. So now I have a snippet for wordly maps where I can just play around and create something. I will make a very simple one for moldable development, where we'll start with manual inspection, then maybe I have custom coding or custom views. And then at the end, ideally, the commodity here would be generated tools. And I could also, for example, link this. I want this to be linked like this. And maybe I want to edit this part here. Make it 2, color it, and give it the arrowhead. So now I lively edited a wordly diagram within a page through a snippet. If I come back just up to my initial link, this one about moldable development, and I click on the page, so I navigate to that page, what you will see at the bottom is that it has a list of references. So it's telling me this page is being referenced from 3 other pages. So I get all the backlinks that point to this page. I could expand it. And in this case, I have 3 backlinks from 3 pages. The current page, this table of contents, and this was my previous page where I was preparing the demo. And in this case, these are all textual. However, this doesn't have to be the case. If I will expand this because it makes it easier to see. So if I go back here to this custom view node. So for me, this node relates to moldable development. So what I want to do is add a link from this node to that page. So in this case, I can get the name of the page, moldable development, save it, and now I can navigate to that page. And if I go back here, I see I have 4 explicit references now instead of 3. And now if I look here, I see that from this page, what is a node, I have 2 references to this. I have a reference from a snippet, and I have a reference from a text snippet, and I have a reference from a wordly map snippet. And this is actually live, so if I modify this, the reference is going to update. So behind Lepíter, there is a model for links that is just links between various pieces of data. We can have those links be textual, be graphical, be any kind of way that we want data to be linked. And if I go back here, we see that within the same workflow, we are coding, we are embedding views of objects, we are writing a rewrite rule, and then we are playing with a wordly map. So it's not like we are having one monolithic tools. We try to decompose tools into smaller pieces that then users can freely combine to form whatever narratives they want. They don't have to be stuck with our narrative. And maybe let's do one more. Let's just for fun, let's tweet. So this is not available by default in GT because it needs a relay server. But if I come here, I will say, I am tweeting during ESUG from Lepíter, ESUG 2022. And now if my internet works, and hopefully it works, I've tweeted. So now if you go to Twitter, you're going to see a tweet from me. So snippets can be anything in the end. Can be tools, that can be small, and that can be combined in whatever narrative we want. Until now, also, these snippets were hard-coded, so we provided the list of snippets that's in the environment. However, often, a very useful thing to do is program. So I want to program my notebooks. I don't want just to have a static notebooks that just use snippets. And of course, the way we can program this is directly within the notebook. Let's create, maybe I want to create a Pharo snippet, and I want to collapse these snippets. And the way we enable programming, in this case, is to a special variable, so it's called this snippet. So anytime in a knowledge base, in a code snippet, I could use this snippet. And this is what gives me, it's like this context, it gives me access to the model of the current snippet in the knowledge base. So just so you see that what this means, if I execute this, I get back an object, it's a Pharo snippet, which has this snippet as a content. But this is not the graphical object, it's the domain object from the model. So if I do knowledge base, they both update because these are 2 UIs opened on the actually same domain object. So I can say knowledge base pages. So in this case, if I will execute this, it's going to give me a list of all the pages that are in this current knowledge base. And let's just expand this snippet. What I want to build is a snippet that gives me all the to-dos that I have in my knowledge base. Maybe I just want to see all the list of to-dos, to see which ones I didn't do yet. So I'm going to do pages. I'm going to do flat collect. So from a page, I want to get all textual snippets in this case. All children text snippets. I could also execute this. Now I will get just the list of snippets. So I have 149 snippets here. And now from each snippet, what I want to collect are all the to-do annotations. One snippet could have more annotations. So I will do another flat collect. So I will say a snippet. A snippet. So now I want to do annotations, not animations, annotations. And now if I execute this, what I get is a list of annotations. So in this case, I have 4 to-do annotations. And now that I have this piece of code, I can create a snippet that automatically executes this piece of code and shows me the results. We label that, we refer to that as an element snippet. So in our case, it's a snippet that takes a piece of code, executes it, returns a graphical element that then is just embedded back within the notebook, within the page. Let's make this a tiny bit bigger. So now I have a code editor. So what I want to do is have a list. So I'm going to use a flow list. So this is just creating a very simple way of creating a list. Flow, and if I could just remember, flow, flow. Do you remember, Alistair, the name? I forgot the name of this class, but doesn't matter. Flow list. Flow list. Flow list view should be something similar. Flow list view, see, I got it. Auto-completion helps to have. I could just tell to this one the items that I want to display, which is just going to be my previous snippet, and the way I want to format an item. So it's going to be item text, and now I will get a to-do, and I could ask it for the label. So I wrote this piece of code, which creates a list. Now I could refresh. I could hide if I want the code. And now what I have here is a widget that displays, I just extended my knowledge base with a snippet with a widget that displays the list of to-dos from my current knowledge base. So like this, you don't necessarily just have to use the snippets that are already there. You could create any kind of snippets that you want that take any information from the knowledge base. So like this, we try to emphasize or try to show that Lepíter can be extended also in ways that we necessarily didn't think of, that maybe users can think of and want to do. To sum up this use case about personal notes, so what I actually have been doing during this day of ESUG is I have been taking notes. So I've been using this knowledge base. If I expand the page, I could see, in this case, I have a table of contents that shows me the whole context of this knowledge base. So for example, for Monday, I had my schedule. So I put the schedule actual here as a table, and then every time I have a page, I could navigate to it and see my notes, for example, about Pyro.js or all the presentations from today. So I'm actually taking notes live in Lepíter. And I use it for all my notes. I think I have more than 1,000 pages of notes that I just take here. Because a lot of my notes are about programming, and then it makes sense to take those notes directly in the ID than somewhere else. And since we have Lepíter in GT, one thing that we started doing is using GT in order to document Glamorous Toolkit. So we are trying to eat our own dog food, let's say. And what I want to show you next is a few examples of how we are doing this. So if you go here in the main page of GT, you're going to see a Glamorous Toolkit book, which if you open will give you access to the Lepíter knowledge base that comes by default with Glamorous Toolkit. And this contains several things. So first, it contains simple tutorials. For example, this is one about how to query code. So here we just have a narrative with text, and in this case, various examples that users can execute in order to learn what we mean by querying code. If you don't like, in this case, to just browse through text, we also organized this here through a slideshow. So this is a snippet for a slideshow that I could expand. And now all of a sudden, from Lepíter, I am within a slideshow. So I'm in a totally different tool, in this case, a slideshow about how I can query code. We are, again, using for documentation. A widget that we like to have, and it's quite nice, was the method syntax. So here we have, for example, a card that shows a live card that shows the pharaoh on a postcard syntax. This is a literal, and what do we have here? Maybe this is a pragma, and then some of these also have comments that explain what they are. So this is an interactive widget, more complex one that we can just take because we had an embed within the documentation. And we have lots and other tutorials. For example, we have one for the memory game. This is one game for the graphical system, and the goal is building this game. However, here you don't see just a static picture. This is actually the real game. So users can play it, okay, 2-2, and I won. And then this is how the game could look like at an intermediate step. And part of this, there are also pages that guide the user step by step through what code they should write. So for example, this is a snippet that has a code change. So users could just write this, perform this by hand, or could go to the diff, see the difference between the current system, or just say, okay, what I want now to do is apply this. So take this code, compile it, and add it to my system. So this could be another way that they could follow the tutorial if they wanted to. And then apart from this, we have a lot of to-dos. So every time people ask us questions about how to do something, we tend to create a Lepíter page describing that. And the question that we're getting a lot is how to scale the UI. So if I have a UI, how do I make it bigger or smaller? So this is a page for that, and maybe now I want to do here 1.5. Let's hope this still works. If I execute now, my UI is bigger, but I don't want. Maybe I can make my UI smaller, but then you'll not see. So just go back to 1.1. So this is just an example of a simple to-do page that we wrote, and we are having it here in case it could be useful for different people. And then we realized that we not only can create documentation like this, but that we can also create tools to help us during the development of Glamorous Toolkit, to understand things or to better reason about our system. And I'm going to show you a few examples of that. This is one. So maybe, I don't know if you look at this as a tool or not, but this is a tool that we created in Lepíter that helped us a lot to understand why the image was growing more than we were expecting when we were loading a lot of code in the image. So what this page does is that it mostly shows some narratives and some numbers. But these numbers that you see here, for example, methods, they have 50.1 megabytes, and it's for 365,000 methods. This number here, if I go close, is not actually text. It's computed live based on the number of methods in the current image. So for us, this page was giving an overview of the size of various code entities from this current image. So what we're doing, we were loading the code, and we're coming to this page, and we're seeing, okay, what changed? What are those numbers? And it helped us quite a lot to figure out where our problem was coming from. And then in GT, what we also have is lots of repositories. So when loading GT, we load code from a lot of repositories. Some are in the Think organization, other we fork, and others are in other places. We just load directly. So we wanted to get a better overview of what those repositories are. So we created a page that was just showing directly that information. We didn't have to go somewhere else to look for it. In this case, I can see that GT, we're loading code from 82 repositories. Out of these, 57 are in the Think organization, 15 are forked, and then external are 9. And then if we want to see them, we can have them below, but these numbers are not just numbers. If I click on, 15, I get back the object that's behind that collection. So in this case, I can just browse those repositories. And what it turned out in this list to be more interesting are these 15 repositories, so are the forked repositories. Because when we fork a repository, and there are changes in that repository, so we might want to update our fork. We might not want to not be up to date. And since we have 15, we are never knowing which ones were up to date, which ones we should update. So to solve that, we build another tool. And in this case, what this tool does is only for forked projects. And what was showing us is that list of forked projects. And the status, it was computing a status. Did this repository diverge from ours? So are there new commits there or not? And if there are, it was showing a status here with red and diverged. We can just have, in our case, we can just have a head or diverge. We cannot have behind. So in this case, if we have zinc, for example, I could double click on it, and then I get the list of commits that we are behind in that repository. So this we are using whenever we want to know, hey, what's our status based on the projects that we forked? Are we behind? Which one should we update? And turned out to be quite useful in figuring out that information. And the tool turned out to be just a Lepíter page that embeds some computation, and then this actually is a view on an object. So we're having these views, and then once we have these views, we can reuse them in many other contexts. They don't just have to be in the inspector. They can be live within our documentation. Now, this is what we've been doing in GT, try to document GT in order to have a better understanding of what's happening within our system. However, we are also using GT with clients, and we are in Lepíter especially. And one company that we are working with is called Polypoly. They are based in Berlin, and their focus is redefining the data economy in a way that preserves users' privacy. So you have your own data, you own your own data, and then how can users make a profit or make money in that context without giving away their privacy? And in that context, one part that we work with them is trying to understand what data exists about a user out there. So what data do companies have about users? And one interesting aspect is that through GDPR, you can go to Facebook, Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, all these companies, and request your own data. And then they give you back an archive, and then that's your data. And then how do you make sense of that? So what we've been trying to do with them is build an infrastructure where we can take that data, import it into GT, and then tell narratives, extract some narratives from that data that are interesting for users to consume. And the way we're doing that is through Lepíter. So let me find that knowledge base. Should be explore your Facebook data. And in this case, we're not going to use real Facebook data. Part of this project is that we can also generate synthetic data. So we can also generate data for like a fake user that resembles real data. So for a demo, I do not like to use my own personal data or some data of a real user. So for example, what you see here is another knowledge base, which what it does, it tells stories about the data of a Facebook user. In this case, it's a generated data, but it could be your data if you import it here, or it could be my data. For example, the first smallest one is this is a view that just shows what type of data is in the actual export. So I can see in this particular one, there are lots of messages of Facebook events. I don't know, maybe I find reactions, if I can see it. I'm not seeing reactions. There should be somewhere here, perfect, you found it. So, for example, these are all the likes, whatever you clicked like, love, wow on a post, on a Facebook post. So if I click on it, I would dive in, and then I would be able to see that data. So if I have a Lepíter page, I don't have to stop exploring at the page. Every data has an object behind it, so if I click, I dive in that object. So in this case, we just have the group of reactions that in this case shows a different view. So it shows me groups the likes based on their type. And then I could continue, maybe I like the likes, and then I want to group them by year. So these are all the likes of this user based on the year, or maybe the wow. So these are all the wows based on this year, or maybe, I don't know, sad. So this user is sad, was most sad in 2019. And here, again, I just have objects and views. And with these objects and views, by combining them in different ways, we can tell lots of interesting narratives. And if I do the other way around here, if I will go first, I could group them by year, and then I could select a year, and then I could group them by type. Now I could browse the other way around. So I'm looking based on the year, and I can see what type of reactions I had in that year. So now I got a different narrative by switching the order of the same views. So the same views in a different order, providing a different kind of narrative. If I go back, so message, for example, this was just one that was giving an overview of the overall data. But then there are other pages that tell more specific narratives about specific data. For example, messages. This one will say and give data if you're using Facebook Messenger about what kind of messages we are using. So, I don't know, number of words, number of calls. Like this one was grouping them by year. And then an interesting one was this one. So based on the threads. So in this case, there are thread, I don't know, this thread or a thread with 51 participants. So grouped by type. So when were messages, or by year, or when were messages in this thread with 51 participants happening? So just one in 2015. What was this? I don't know, maybe a spam. And just one more example here about something that we found interesting is this one. So often, if you download your Facebook data, what you're going to see is that you are having both data about actions that you are doing on Facebook. Maybe you are liking a page on Facebook, or maybe you see an ad on Facebook. And then we also get data that other companies are sending to Facebook. Maybe you click maybe some companies Facebook for marketing. So then they send Facebook all the actions that you do on that website. And this is one example that we see often. For example, in this case, the user was seeing a lot of ads. So Facebook was serving ads to these users for a few months. And then the user made a purchase on their website. Maybe it happened because of the ads, maybe not, but it's interesting to find these correlations in your data. So to find places where you get a lot of ads on Facebook and then you do an activity offline on that company website, or maybe the other way around. And if we look at this again, what this is just a view of an object that we take and we embed in the actual documentation, nothing else. I could actually explore this object, and then it's a related account, and it can have different views, and one of those views was this one. And we can take this one and get an embed directly within the documentation. And like this, we can tell lots of interesting stories about the data. So in this case, and in this case for these companies, this is the tool that's used within the company by the product owner, developers, in order to see what's interesting about this data, what should they focus on next. And last but not least, if we come back here, until now here, we were just within this image. So all the computation here was just happening within this single Pharo image. However, lots of times, if we have especially a lot of data, we don't want necessarily the computation to happen in this image. We want the computation to happen in other images. And also, maybe, like we saw before, in some other talks, maybe there is an interesting JavaScript library that implements our computation, or a Python library. And then we also want to be able to work with that. So one part of Lepíter is that several types of snippets that we have are snippets that do the computation in a different environment. So for example, this is a gemstone snippet. So if I'm going to execute this code, here I have a connection open to a gemstone database. So gemstone, for those of you that don't know, it's an object-oriented database. You can think of it. So if I will execute this code, and gemstone works, so now this code was actually executed on the gemstone server, and this is how this particular stone or gemstone instance identifies itself. And we can do JavaScript, JavaScript, Python, and other Pharo images if we want. And I will show you here a quick example of this, and then we will do another more complicated one just to get a feel of how this works. So here I have a computation that gets from these pages all the, the size of all pages. And then I want to do some statistics, and now in this case I want to compute the variance, and for that I install simple statistics in JavaScript. And now I'm going to execute this. Now I get this number, the variance, which was computed in JavaScript. So data was passed from Pharo to the JavaScript engine. We can pass it then to Gemstone or to Python if we would like. And just a slightly more complicated example. Where was it? Yarn. So if you're using Node, you'll have yarn files. So these are the files yarn.log that will contain all the dependencies of your project. So in this case, we download from the internet the dependencies of D3. And this gives us a yarn file that we need to parse. However, we said, there is already a yarn parser available in this package. So here we're just passing this file as a parameter to the parser in JavaScript. And we're getting back a JSON dictionary with the data. And then we have some computation in Pharo. That's mostly what it does. Massages a bit the data so that we can extract better dependencies. And then we can print it as a raw SAL visualization. It's a Mondrian visualization. But the interesting part here is, again, this, because you can start from some data that is in one runtime, in this case, Pharo, and then pass it to JavaScript, get back the results, and do some visualizations within GT. And last but not least, up to now, again, we've just been in the image, but again, where do we consume these documents? Sometimes we don't want for people to consume the GT book maybe just in the image. We also want to consume it on the web or somewhere else. So again, this is not in the standard image, but let me just copy this. However, what I could do, here I have a publish button where we have the thing blog. So from here, it is possible to specify, let's say like this. So now what this is going to do is simply going to publish this page. In this case, we could publish the entire knowledge base, but just this page, if the internet works, let's see. Yes, it published it as a new page in the Lepíter blog, in the Think blog. And now if I go to this, I could get a page. So in this case, it's been published to the web, and you could see it actually in the Think blog. So this is actually how we are publishing all of our content on the web. I want this one. As not always, we want that this documentation is simply only always consumed within the image. And I guess that was mostly what I wanted to show you today. So this is Lepíter. Within Lepíter, what we're trying to do is not focus on monolithic tools. We try to have small snippets that users can combine in order to form their own narratives. And we try to have Lepíter provide a unified entry point for programming, personal note-taking, and data science, all within one single interface. Okay, that was my presentation. Now if you have questions.
So the linking of page, does it happen based on the title of the page? For me, the biggest problem many times is how to find if there exists a page about some content. Let's say I want to see how to query code, and then generally I happen to go through each Lepíter page to find actually what I want.
Well,
I mean, if I don't know the title,
then you search. So it's easy to forget. So she asked, what if she doesn't know the link of the page? What does she find the right page in order to learn something in GT? So for that, all the Lepíter pages, the entire knowledge base is linked within Spotter. So if you know at least some words that you want to do, you'll perform a search.
and then the search is based on all keywords or on the title of that page?
So she asked if the search is based on all keywords, on all the titles of the page. I think in this case, it's mostly based on the title. Query. So if I do pages, so you get two search. So you get named pages, page name. So this is through the title, and then you get pages, and this is whatever content is in that page. Because sometimes you just want to search through the names. So show me the names, and sometimes search through everything, please. Okay, then thank you for your time.